basis is an acceptable level that generally economists think won't produce a lot of inflation. But again, that becomes something that's really hard for the public to understand in this dynamic. And I don't even mention how hard it is for the administration to talk about that.
On the Federal Reserve and how they're going to read this data, Mike, obviously it's going to be important. That is why we have been talking about it for the last 2.5 hours. And yet we're getting it here on August 10th, which is your birthday. Happy birthday, by the way. Well before the September 21st meeting, we get another CPI print before that. So how much is this really going to influence whether the move is 75 basis points in September?
That will depend on the makeup of it. The headline numbers won't matter as much, particularly the headline number, because it is so heavily influenced by energy and food, and there are signs that both of them are going to start to come down. But they'll look at the core and they'll take that apart and they'll want to see whether we're seeing broad-based price increases. Are those high unit labor costs being passed on through a lot of different industries? If that's the case, they might be leaning towards 75. But you're right, we have another indicator. Well, we've got two, because we've got a PCE at the end of August, and then we've got the CPI in September. And so if there's a trend, we may get another view of how that trend is playing out. And particularly interesting is that the next CPI report in September is during the Fed blackout. So we'll get a response today from a couple of Fed speakers to what they see in the CPI today, but you won't have any guidance in September after that CPI comes out.
On radio, you should see the TV chart of the 2-year yield lifting up here. We see that right now with an ever so slight lift here into this inflation report to 2 digits, 3.28% of the 2-year yield. Now, because it's your birthday, does that mean the Braves gift the Red Sox a win tonight?
Possibly. I think that's only fair. I mean, they had, they teased last night. They did not do Kaylee any favors on her birthday yesterday by losing in the 11th inning, but they came close.
Oh, good. Happy birthday, Michael McKee. He'll continue with us here with important coverage of what we see on price change in America. Lisa, we've got to remember that this is not a bunch of mathematical mumbo jumbo. This is a huge part of America flat on their back.
Especially the lower income tiers, where it's eating up a bigger and bigger proportion of disposable income, where you have people making the decision between filling up their gas tanks and buying an extra sweater or an extra pair of pants. And how much do we see that continue to pressure margins, which is some of the bear cases going forward, versus alleviate against price increases and getting inflation back down.
4分ぐらいか。で、7月のアメリカの CPI だよね。が発表されます。で、かなりなんかもう上に、ね、なんかもう上に行くんだみたいな感じで、相場はもう買われているような感じなんですけども、どうなんでしょう。
We welcome all of you to this historic report on the nation's inflation with futures up 13. Stay with us with Michael McKee. This is Bloomberg.
相場が買われると思っている感じですよね。
That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
ちょっと待って。なんでこれ上がってんの急に上がりましたけど。何？もう出たの？そんなことないよ。ちょっと待って。どれだっけ？これで出んだっけ？チャレレレレン。コアインフレ。 どれぐらい？あともうちょっと。出たのかな？あと8秒。これで出ない。実績。わけわかんない。もう出てるよね。あ、でも上行ってるわ。
Bloomberg Surveillance, we welcome all of you. John Farrow out today. Kaylee lines in with Lisa Bramlett and Tom Keene here. Moments away from an inflation report, waiting for the numbers across the acclaimed ECO screen of the Bloomberg terminal. And Michael McKee will give us a view to maybe what will be a constructive report.
It's a constructive report, Tom. It comes in better than expected with CPI on a month-over-month basis flat, no change at all. That is down from 1.3% in the month of June.
No
so
change.
A major drop in the headline number. The core goes up by 0.3%. The forecast was for 0.5, and in June it was 0.7. So that's an unexpectedly better than forecast report. On a year-over-year basis, CPI is at 8.5%. We'd expected a drop to 8.7 from the 9.1 last month, and the core is at 5.9%. Now the expectation was it would go higher. 5.9 was the same number as in June. The expectation was it would go higher to 6.1% because pressures were spreading. But this is the kind of news that's going to make the folks at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and at the White House and at the Fed smile a little bit.
Mike, look into the data further. We'll come right back to you with a big lift to the market. Futures up 1.38%, 57 S&P points down over 33,000 is remarkable, 356 points, and a solid 2% move in the NASDAQ 100. Lisa, describe the 210 spread with a launch to a lesser inversion.
Yeah, I think that is the takeaway here. You see the two-year yield plunge on the heels of the right kind of downside surprise. Right. You've got a tick back to 43, a negative 43 yield curve inversion of basis points. Honestly, though, how much does this really move the needle when you're still talking about core CPI at 5.9%? I think it's going to be the key message from a lot of Fed officials.
Yeah, a step at a time here. Dollar comes in weaker with finally a 103 print on euro is, well, Michael, the level of surprise here on a fan distribution of all the experts you reviewed. Where are we on that fan distribution? This has got to be right at the edge of great news?
Yeah, as long as you define great news as something that doesn't move that much, because as one of you guys was saying just before we went on the air, this isn't going to be a big straight line.
The president's going to come out and say, we've launched from 9.1% down to 8.5%. Can the president extrapolate out and say we're going to be at 8.2% or 8.3% in 30 days?
My guess looking at this is that maybe he can look at some of the underlying numbers. Now, we don't know what will happen with energy prices. The war goes on in Ukraine. But at this point, gasoline is down 7.7% in the month. In June, it rose 11.2%. So do we get the same kind of percentage percentage drop? That's hard to say. Food prices went up. Food at home 1.3% higher. It was 1% in June. Now we've seen agricultural commodities fall, so maybe that will work its way into prices. We get PPI tomorrow. We'll take a look at that. Also, food prices depend a lot on the weather, so you can't say for sure these things are going to happen. But we finally see a drop in used car prices. Been waiting for that for a long time, down 0.4%. They rose 1.6% last month. New car prices up 0.6. That's a tenth lower. And apparel prices, this is one to watch, down 0.1 after rising 0.8 the month before. Remember, all the earnings reports that we've had on retailers, they're all talking about large inventories that they're going to have to mark down to get rid of because people, they didn't get them into the stores in time for the right seasons. So there are discount stores that are going to be putting those things on sale.
日中のさ、売買動向見てなかった。日中の売買動向で、ラージがなんか1000枚近く買われていて、でミニ以上に買われているから、ラージはね、結構買われてるなと思ったんですよ。日中。だから、なんか、そういうのもあって、
bogus mathematics, what everybody reads on a Wednesday morning. What I'm looking at, though, Tom, you are so right to be looking at the NASDAQ and the S&P surging, and it gets the Fed further away from their goal, right? I mean, how much is this not what the Fed wants to be seeing at a time where they want financial conditions
I like
to tighten,
that idea.
and they want to get it down quickly? Mike, how much are Fed officials going to push back against the sort of belief in a sort of doubling down on the Fed pivot on the basis of this data?
They'll push back on it because this is one report, and as we said, there are several more before the next time they have to make a decision. And you look at some of the other categories in this, it's still got some worrisome news. We're looking at rent of shelter up 0.5% after 0.6 last month, and rent of primary residence up 0.7. The owner's equivalent rent, which is the measure that they look at to see what house prices are doing, up 0.6 after 0.7 last month. So it's still in the shelter category, the rent category, still going up at a fairly strong pace, and that is going to be a problem going forward because it takes a long time to get that through the system.
Our advantage is Michael McKee will dive into the pages and pages of data that we see in this inflation report for America. To summarize again, a constructive inflation report. Brian Deese with Lisa Abramowitz in the 9 o'clock hour on radio and television with a White House view on that good news. Futures up 67 and the Nasdaq again up 2.4%.
Here's the worst news for you, Tom.
Please.
You probably already knew this. Distilled spirits at home up 0.7
Yes,
in the last month.
それね、あんまり見たことない。
1/10
本当
in
に。
June. So a big
今日起き
rise
たか
there.
I
ら。
heard about that from Michael Pond before you brought it up. At a global inflation-linked research at Barclays, Pond always diving into the inflation data. Michael, you and I go back to when nobody wanted to talk to you because inflation was boring. Inflation is now less than boring. When do we get back to boring inflation?
Well, first of all, Tom, this was a good report. We could stop there, but we're not going to. This is a necessary print for the Fed, but it's not sufficient. We need to see a lot more. You can think about this print as sort of like the weather. It's better today than it has been over the past few days, but it's still summer. There's still a lot of humidity out there. It's not great. It's in the right direction, but we're certainly not there yet.
What will be the bond response to this? Michael, you are expert at the analysis across full faith and credit. What is your government bond theme off a better inflation report for America?
Well, again, what does it mean for the Fed? And what we think it means for the Fed is it makes it more likely that our call will be right for the September FOMC hike of 50 basis points. If we had gotten another strong reading, even on consensus reading going into it, that increased the chance of 75. So for now, we feel pretty comfortable about our 50 basis point call. That's less than what was priced in. So it's not surprising that we're seeing a bit of a rally here with a bit of a steepening in the curve.
Michael, how about that bogus mathematics that Tom Keene was doing, trying to extrapolate out the pace of declines? Can we do that? Is there any linear extrapolation that you're looking at to determine how quickly we go back to a rate that's much more palatable to both consumers as well as officials?
Sure. So as Mike was saying, the details matter. And one of the key details of today's report was that the shelter component, which makes up 40% of core, is still rising at a strong rate. Importantly, that tends to trend. So if the downside surprise was because of a couple outliers that aren't expected to continue, then that's going to not give the Fed any complacency here. They're going to continue to weigh on the factors within CPI that trend. So the fact that shelter component continues to be strong, you can't just linearly extrapolate today's print into even the August print, which we still expect to be relatively strong.
How concerning is it to you, Michael, that the knee-jerk reaction is what we're seeing in equity markets right now? A strong rally, just over, like in 1 minute, just bam, there you go. People are going full risk. How much do you fade that versus lean into that on the expectation that, yes, we are seeing a deceleration, and yes, we have been past peak inflation?
Well, first of all, it's not surprising. You know, these days, when data comes out, the market's reaction, particularly risk-on assets, tend to be good news is bad news. We saw that in the employment report on Friday, when we got a really good report, and what that did is raise expectations of more Fed hikes, which isn't good for risk-on assets. So we have a report today that leads to a little bit more less hawkish Fed. I won't say dovish, and therefore it's good for risk assets today.
Michael McKee with us as well. Michael Pond of Barclays with us. If you're just joining us on radio and television, it's a terrific inflation report. A joy for the White House, no question about that. And markets celebrate up 68 S&P points, 1.7%. NASDAQ up 2.3%, even up more a bit ago. Michael McKee has had a few minutes here to dive further into the report. You were making a joke about spirits at home. That's the degree of granularity you can go to. What's another granular item that sticks out?
Well, one thing I was interested in was what happened with medical care, because we've just had this new legislation that would be passed. Prescription drugs were up 0.3% after a 0.1 gain. That's a fairly high move for prescription drugs. So that's something that could be affected if the administration is able to get something in place to negotiate for Medicare, and if the companies don't raise the price on people who don't get Medicare. Non-prescription drugs up 1.3%. So if you're taking Tylenol because you had too much of the distilled spirits, Tom, you're paying more for that. The recreation component up 0.2. Commodities with declining prices, as we've seen for some time for television, video equipment, etc. So some of the inflation dynamics that we are used to are coming into play here.
If you're just joining us on radio and on television to the Bloomberg world, Michael McKee is with us, and Michael Pond as well of Barclays, and of course Bloomberg, after an historic inflation report. Calendar item, Brian Deese in conversation with our Lisa Abramowitz here within the hour. We've seen markets, of course, surge and continue to surge. S&P 500 a 1.7% move, and critically, the VIX comes in a whole stick. We've walked away from 22 to a more constructive market of 20.69. Kaylee?
Well, Tom, I'm looking at break-even rates as well, not just nominal yields. On the 2-year, we're down 11 basis points on the day, 2.78%. So, Michael Pond, does that seem correct to you that 2 years out from now, we're realistically going to have inflation that much closer to the Fed's target?
We think so. The market is priced for a decent amount of disinflation, and our forecast actually have even more disinflation, so lower inflation than what the market is priced in. The market's priced for almost 3% inflation, not just next year, but 2 years from now. The 1-year rate implied by break-evens is almost at 3%. So the market's not believing that the Fed has yet done enough to bring inflation down anytime soon. Now, if we look further out, say 5-year 5-year implied
15,900
market,
枚。
that is
だから
priced
1600
more
枚分
consistent
ぐ
with
ら
the
い
Fed's
買い越し
target
にな
of
りました。
2%. So the market thinks that over
ラージ
time
が
the Fed will get it right,
878
but
枚。
it'll
ま
take
た増え
several
たね。
years, not just a couple of quarters.
Michael Pine, stay with us, please, with Barclays, and Michael McKee with us. Now joining us, we're only doing Michael's today on the inflation show. Kaylee demanded that. Michael Gapin joins us now, head of U.S. Economics at Bank of America Global Research. And this is an incredibly important add-on to our coverage in that B of A has a really cautious call on the equity markets and on the bond space as well. Michael, you have my best chart I've seen in 3 days, which is the duration of painful inflation for Americans. Does it really sustain out into next year and even into 2024?
I
mean, we think it does in the sense that it will take a few years for inflation to get back down to the Fed's target and restoring price stability. We think there'll be stickiness primarily in the area of some of these services prices that, yes, airlines gave us a bit of a relief today, but there will likely be some ongoing stickiness on the services side. Obviously, the very good news in this report is what we saw with used cars. We've all been waiting for some of these durables prices to come down. That would be the next shoe to drop after gasoline prices come down. So a lot of good news in this report, no questions at all, but I think we're looking for some stickiness in services to persist.
Michael, let me steal the thunder then from Katie Lyons. She was discussing demand destruction. Do we see demand destruction in this report away from used cars?
Not in this one particular report. No, we see some relief here.
全然この辺薄商いでね、
the weaker the rest of the world
指
gets,
標が出
sometimes it
て、
helps out the
ラー
U.S.
ジの
In this case, the decline in energy
今
prices and how
7910
quickly
円から
that feeds through to
パーンと上がったん
gasoline
だけど、
prices. And again, if
10円
this is
刻
the
みの
first of successive
枚数が
reports
ね、
where we can see some reversals in durables prices, that's going to help out the
50枚も
U.S.
取引され
consumer.
てない。
Well, obviously, Michael, the Fed's goal is to get demand
だから
down.
す
They
ごい
also
薄
would
商い
like
で
to see
こうバーッと
financial
上がってった
conditions
から、
getting more restrictive.
下が
And
る
what we
時
see
も
with a
そ
more
れ
than
なりに
2% rally on the
早い
NASDAQ
と思うんです
100
よ。
futures right now is
だ
financial
からそ
conditions
れは気を
actually
つけま
getting
しょう。
easier. Is a good news report on the inflation
分岐
front
点はど
still
こ
a
だ
bad news report for the Federal
28000
Reserve if that
か
is the
多
outcome?
分。
No, I think that the way that I would look at it is
28000割るとちょっと
obviously the
危
labor
ういですね。
market is extremely strong and demand conditions are strong. And as your previous guest, Michael Pond mentioned, good news there is bad news in terms of what it means for the Fed. The Fed's soft landing outlook is greatly improved if core goods start rolling over, for example. So the softer inflation prints are, the more the Fed can accept good news on the other side of the data front. So, they need these types of reports in order to, improve the likelihood of soft landing.
What's a calendar item on that, Michael McKee? I believe we're in August 10-ish. We're going to get to September 10-ish. There's going to be another report, right?
I believe it's September 13th. I can double check that very quickly.
Fine, but the point is, if we get 2 months like this, how does that change the dialogue for Chairman Powell? Does he take a victory lap?
No, he doesn't take a victory lap. He makes sure that everybody knows that the Fed is still focused on this because it's going to take, just mathematically, and Michael Gapin can probably give you a better off the top of his head hint than me. It's going to take a long time to get down to where the Fed will feel comfortable in moving rates. They've said they're going to get to neutral or above neutral and stay there even as inflation declines. So they're going to have to get down to 3% or so is what they're hinting before they do any kind of move. How long does that take?
We see an advanced Dow futures now at 433,152 on the Dow. SPX up 71 points and a 2.4% move on NASDAQ 100. Really something. Kaylee?
Let's bring Michael Pond back into the conversation as well. Obviously, we've now had a few minutes to digest this report, yet the moves are sticking in the bond market. Can they stick past today?
Well, what we think was clear in this report, and it's been our view, that the inflation outlook is now much more balanced than it had been. A few months ago, everything was pointing in the same direction of risk to inflation being to the upside. Whether we look at commodities, shipping costs, the dollar, wage growth, et cetera, they're all in the same exact direction. And now it's a much more balanced outlook. Wages, as Mike Gapin just said, the labor market is very tight, and that's coming through in the wage report that we got on Friday. today, and average hourly earnings as well. So, but on the flip side, commodities have rolled over. You'd look at copper, palm oil, corn, coffee, cotton. Pick any commodity, and it's likely been, off its peak. Shipping costs on a year-over-year basis are down 30%. So energy's down. So you can go down the list, and it's a much more balanced outlook, and that's some of what we got today. But you really need consistency in these reports.
Yeah.
One report is not all it's going to take.
Well, and of course, one report is not all we're getting this week. Michael Gapin, PPI is tomorrow. What's the read-through?
I think the read-through there is, ex energy prices, we're still likely to see, solid underlying price pressures in the domestic economy. So 0.4, 0.5, which is kind of where the market is thinking. Later in the week, I think will be really interesting to see if import prices ex petroleum decline again for the second straight month. That's where our head is around. That's where consensus is. Again, that's to Mike Pon's point. We need to see these types of things coming through. We need to see them on more than one report. Getting a strong dollar to give us some pass-through into import prices in the context of lower trade costs would be very important. But I think we suspect a blend here. Strong import or strong underlying price pressures, producer prices, but we could get some more relief on import prices.
Michael, what's the number? Michael, I got 5 Michaels with me today. Nathanson's on deck. It's Killer Kaylee. Who did this? I mean, I've never had so many Michaels around me in my life. Michael Gapin of Bank of America, what is the single attribute that drives inflation lower from a 9% level?
I don't think that there's one. This is the point. You don't get bad outcomes on inflation like this without a multitude of things happening. So I think we need relief on energy and commodity prices. We're getting that. We need payback on core goods prices. Some signs we're getting that. And then we need moderation in the domestic economy. I don't think it's one thing. I think we need to have advances on multiple fronts.
Tom, if I could add just one more to that, inflation expectations. So the Fed in June was particularly concerned about a sharp jump in the inflation expectation component of the Michigan survey. That's back down now, as is the inflation expectations components of the New York Fed survey, and break-evens as well off their highs. So that's an important factor for the Fed in their outlook for inflation.
Right now, Michael Gapin has to leave us at Bank of America. Thank you so much, Michael Gapin, for dropping by today on this historic moment. Michael McKee with us with Bloomberg Economics, and of course, Michael Pond of Barclays continues with his true expertise in the fixed income space. Kaylee, why don't you bring in Cameron Kreis, who's synthesizing this? I want to do a major shout out though first to Michael Nathanson, who we were going to have Craig Moffat on, but it's an all Michael show until Kreis showed up. So we had Nathanson on to talk about the media, and we will do that again soon with a giant from Moffat Nathanson. Kaylee?
Yeah, record number of Michaels. I'm about to start calling you Michael Tom Keene, but let's get to Cameron Kreis, who has a different name, thank the Lord, who is also parsing this data. Cameron, just looking at the moves we are seeing on the back of this, yields dramatically lower, futures dramatically higher, the dollar dramatically weaker. Is this just a knee-jerk reaction, or is this one that's going to stick off the back of this print?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we're just sort of unwinding a lot of what we priced after the payroll figure, right? Essentially that pushed us to 75 for September, and now we've gone back to 50. So I suspect we'll continue to price 50 for September. I would think that certainly the yield front,
予想よりも予想はだから 0.2 だったのがフラット変わらずってことだね。
that kind of remains sort of subject to
the ebb and
flow not only of inflation and monetary policy, but also clearly there's a sensitivity to growth numbers as well. So if we see henceforth that some of the growth figures are looking quite poor, then one might posit that equities could in turn look a little more vulnerable.
And of course, we could see a fresh catalyst for markets across asset classes later on today when we get reaction to these numbers from Federal Reserve officials. Michael McKee, we're just about 2 hours away from Charlie Evans talking about the economy. Then a little later on, Neil Kashkari will be discussing inflation in particular. What do you expect their messaging to be after a print like this one?
Well, you know, they come from different places a little bit. Charlie Evans a little more dovish than Neil Kashkari, but I think they're both going to deliver the same bottom line message that this is good news, but we are going to wait until we get much closer to the decision to make a decision about what we're going to do in September, because as Cameron was saying, things can go back and forth. Greg Peters was talking earlier about how volatility is the name of the game, and that's what we're going to be seeing with all of these numbers for the next month, because nobody really knows where we're going with this.
Michael Pond, what's your lead concept as you write for Barclays this morning?
Well, you know, the takeaway from the Fed perspective, you don't think of the Fed as a risk manager. And a year from now, if they didn't do enough and inflation's still high, they will have been seen as making a big mistake. If they do too much and inflation comes in too low and the economy is a little bit softer, they'll call that a win. And so, you know, from a risk management perspective, this print doesn't change the outlook. They still need to continue to focus on bringing inflation down, even though this is good news.
Michael Pond, I'm going to let you go because I know you've got duties at Barclays as well. We're going to continue here with Michael McKee and Cameron Kreis of Bloomberg. But Michael Pond, thank you so much for joining us today. Cameron, just on a hunch, I did a quick Fibonacci retrace of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It was just a hunch. And we are exactly at a 50% retracement from the top to the bottom and making it back up to the top again of Dow 36,000. When do you know that a bear market rally is the beginning of a bull market?
In hindsight, is the only real answer. The only real answer there. I mean, I think it's easy to forget. I mean, if we go back and look at historical analogs. In 2000, the peak of the dot-com bubble, the market peaked in March, but almost reached a new high in September. If you look at the S&P 500, even the Nasdaq 100 came within like 13% of its bubble peak in September of 2000. So a retest or a substantial rally after an initial drawdown is completely consistent with a lot of
今一つのレジスタンスに入ったので、ここが28000飛んで55円あたり。
Well, Cameron, will the Federal Reserve be happy to see new highs in the equity market when they want tighter financial conditions? At what point, what level would they step in and be like,
もし上があるとしたら、その次が28180円。で、その上あったら28155円ということなんですけども、まあそこまでいくかどうかなんだよね。今一応その28000飛んで55円あたり、こちらを通過したんで、まあここら辺がそのまあ一応レジスタンスになってますよということですね。
This isn't the end of the tightening cycle, and let's not
ただ
forget
この
we still
勢い
got
を
a
見ると
payroll
ね、
number and another CPI figure before they render their decision
でもなんかほら、
in September. So
ラー
everything
ジに
can
売りが
still
入ってき
change.
てよ、これ。
Cameron Kreis, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Head of macro policy here at macro research, I should say, here at Bloomberg. Dropping in briefly, too briefly, Kathy Jones joins us, chief fixed income strategist at Charles Schwab. Kathy, good news. Do I buy bonds, bills, and notes?
Well, I think this is, as all your previous speakers have been saying, it's a first step. It's certainly not conclusive that we've got, peak inflation behind us. But yes, all along we have thought that as long as the Fed is determined to get inflation down, then the yield curve will invert. They will tighten until that happens, and ultimately that is good news for the bond market.
On that curve inversion, obviously it is less so now after the report cap at negative 42 basis points. Have we already seen the depths if this is the trend?
if we get some more good prints like this and some easing up in the labor market data, I would think that maybe that was it. Historically, it's been hard to go below 40 or 50 basis points on 210. So we did it in the early 80s, but we haven't really done it since. So my guess is that could be the low if we are in a place where where we start to see these trends in the right direction.
Kathy, to move it to Fed policy, Michael McKee had to leave here as he gets ready for his continuing coverage for the morning of this huge news. And I do want to emphasize, folks, we've still got a bid to the market. We're not down to a 19 VIX, but we're getting there rapidly, 20.58 on the VIX. Kathy, is today a sea change for the analysis of this Fed? Is today a profound day or another day along the path?
Well, I guess we'll only know that, a couple of months from here. But I think it could be, it's a huge sigh of relief for the Fed. It gives them some breathing room. And it could mark a turning point. We just need to see more confirmation of that, where we start to see the numbers ebb a bit consistently, and then the Fed can say, that this was the turning point.
But Kathy, a turning point in the pace of rate hikes or a turning point in terms of the ultimate destination?
The pace more than the destination. Now, the destination's been up for grabs anyway. I think there's been a wide disagreement among economists, among the Fed members, and in the market as to where the ultimate destination is. And we still don't know, but the pace could ease up a bit, which would be good news.
Kathy Jones, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Too short notice here, and we'll have much more with her in the coming days. She is at Charles Schwab as well. Kaylee, Neil Dutta published this moments ago. We are thrilled that he could join us yesterday from Renaissance Macro. And he gets to the story of now. Wage growth is running red hot. And absent a turnaround in productivity, this will ultimately fuel higher prices. There in a single sentence, Kaylee, is the fold-in of this efficiency of our economy, our productivity, wage growth, and the idea of how it affects price. And the answer is this is tangible.
Yeah, and it's going to be something to watch in the reports going forward, Tom, because ultimately what we've just heard from all of our guests is, yes, this is good news, but it is only one day of data. We have another CPI report coming in September prior to the Fed's next policy decision. So is this the beginnings of the makings of a trend, or is this just a standout report?
Well,
obviously, Tom.
Yeah, I'm going to be more optimistic about it after a bang-up jobs report and after this hugely constructive CPI report. There is a sequence here, but as Neil Dutta says, what about the nation's productivity? Please stay with us. Brian Deese in the next hour.
From New York City, for our viewers worldwide, I am Lisa Abramowitz in for Jonathan Farrow. Right now, you are seeing a surge in markets at the heel of a softer than expected CPI print. We'll walk you through that. The countdown to the open starts right now.
Everything you need to get set for the start of U.S. trading. This is Bloomberg, The Open, with Jonathan Farrow.
これがロイターさんのやつなんだけども、次はこれから見ましょう。ロイター調査。
We begin with the big issue. Markets looking at one thing.
Today's CPI number.
Another CPI reading.
This was a good report.
The market is desperate for some kind of hard evidence that the inflation surge is lessening.
This is a necessary print for the Fed, but it's not sufficient. We need to see a lot more.
If we've reached peak inflation, what does that really tell us?
We're going to see inflation decline, but to what level?
Does it mean it's really going to fall down to that 2% target that the Fed is looking for?
This idea of peak inflation, that's just a math problem to us. I'm not sure it's investable.
We are entering, I think, a new phase in the inflation debate.
It's really about core inflation.
Ultimately, the Fed focuses on core more than headline.
With this jobs report and the inflation numbers,
it's not surprising that we're seeing a bit of a rally here.
What Chair Powell told us is, well, he's data dependent.
This makes it more likely that our call will be right for the September FOMC hike of 50 basis points.
All talking about that CPI, and if you're just joining now, it came in at 8.5% versus the expected expected headline number of 8.7%, fueling this rally in markets ahead of the open. Joining us now, Richard Bernstein of RB Advisors and James Camp of Eagle Asset Management. Richard, love to start with you. Your first reaction on how much you can lean into this rally, lean into this feeling that this really does relieve pressure from the Fed.
So Lisa, good morning. I think that the Fed is still on full watch. I think that we have one number which is certainly encouraging. No two ways about that, right? It comes in better than people think. But we have service inflation still rising. Most people haven't pointed that out yet. Service inflation is still rising in the United States. The labor market is historically tight still. And the economy is historically unproductive. You haven't heard too much about that either. The last print, the U.S. was the least productive year on year it has ever been in history. So that is not a good combination for inflation. I think the Fed's really still on full watch.
And I would guess that a lot of people are feeling the same, in particular Academy's Peter Scheer, who just weighed in on the latest CPI report, writing, fading this on the risk side of the equation. It's still high enough so the Fed is not completely out of the picture, which may lead us back to fixating on recession, inventory, semiconductors, warnings, etc. James, are you in the same camp as Pete Scheer?
Yeah, Lisa, we've discussed what I call the inertial elements of the CPI and inflation, and those things are still intact to us. Owner's equivalent rent, wages, as Richard mentioned, lack of productivity growth. We had better oil prices. I mean, that's essentially what the CPI tells us. That can reverse. I mean, if China reopens and a number of other things happen, that can go the other way. So I think the Fed is absolutely committed. They have made a policy error a year or so ago, and I think this is still a go, perhaps for 75. But we're going to get the funds rate, the real funds rate, well above equilibrium, and we're going to slow aggregate demand. That's the only game left for inflation. We're not out of the woods. We've missed, by the way. This is the first time we came in better than expected on inflation. We've missed to the downside 17 of 18 months. So I think the inflation story is misunderstood by a lot of people.
Wow, 17 out of 18 times. It's incredible perspective. Just to sort of recap where we are after this better than expected or weaker than expected CPI front, you are seeing it reflected in Fed funds futures, inflation cooling more than expected. Now there are these bets for a more dovish Fed that continue to pervade the markets. The sovereign print triggering a move in risk assets, futures surging as bond yields plunge. Michael McKee here. Mike, how significant was this decline in the CPI?
Well, it's significant because it was more than expected. And in a lot of areas, the Fed has been expecting to see drops. We got those. So I don't want to go back to the word transitory, but some of the things that stayed up longer than they anticipated were falling. The gasoline prices were the biggest change in this CPI, down 7.7%. Food, though, still rising. Owner's equivalent rent, the measure of home prices, still rising at a significant pace. So those things are going to keep inflation elevated for a while. Used cars, apparel finally fell. Also, I didn't have it on this list, but airfares fell a lot. Should keep falling because the major travel season is going to be coming to an end. So there's a possibility we see this again in the August report in September. But as Richard was pointing out, services prices are still rising, and you can see the blue there. Those are services prices. Prices come down as people shift their spending. And the question is, are they going to continue to rise because companies are still having to pay more money? Service industry people having to pay more money because wages are rising. We did see real average weekly earnings fall 3.6%, which is better than the 4% the prior month. But it still shows Americans are behind the inflation curve. They're losing money, and so there is still going to be wage pressure out there, and that's what the Fed's going to keep an eye on over the next 6 weeks or so.
Mike McKee, thank you so much, and happy birthday. Richard and James both still with us. Richard, just going back to that point of the services sector, inflation of some of the areas that are stickier and seeing increases, how much do we need to see that stabilize before you get confident in this move? What of the headline inflation number are you looking for?
So I think there's two things you want to look for. Number one is you want to see, as Michael just pointed out, the wage story. You want to see that actually really moderate pretty substantially. Some people have said we can't be in a wage and
で、こういうの全部合わせて、こっちの下の方に出てくるんですけども、これで3490に対して4042枚の買いになりますので、542枚の買い越しになります。さっきと比べて減ったね、これ。おもろいね。だから、ラージはまあ一応買いは買いなんだけども、ちょっともう行き過ぎだよってこと言ってんだね、これね。そういうことでしょ、これ。アンさん分かったかな？どうでしょう。
James, do you also see a problem with potential wage
そうだから
price spirals considering the
買ってい
fact that
る人
people
と
are
売
going to
っている
look
人がいれ
for
ば、
perhaps bigger
売り
incomes
と
on
変え
the
てチャラ
heels
なんだ
of
け
a
ども、
declining real income?
Because I think the labor market is the story right now, and it is confusing, I think, for all market participants. You know, we do have
その時間
participation rates
帯の
not back
中
to
で
pre-COVID levels. The
買ってる
productivity
人
data,
が
as mentioned, are poor.
多ければ
Wages are going higher and higher, and I think we've unsettled the labor market.
売
So
ってる
we
人
really
より
don't
も
know
買
what
っ
it
てる
looks
人が
like
多け
going
れば
forward
買い
in
越し
a
なんですよ。
post-COVID era. So for now, the employees, the wage earners have the upper hand. We are seeing continued pressure on small business. We are seeing difficult to fill indices at all-time highs, and we're seeing wage growth high. And you combine
ビッ
that
ト
with
とオファ
some
ー
of
があ
the
る
other
でしょ。その
metrics,
買い
save the
板を
energy.
見
This
て
is still an inflation story. Yeah, better data at
買
the
う方と売
margin
り
is
方がある
helpful,
でしょ。
but we still have a
例え
price
ば、
problem. We have an inflation problem, a regressive
2
tax on all
8,040 円
citizens.
の
And the Federal Reserve, I
買
think,
い
is full
と
on. I
2
don't think this pivot or this notion of a
8,050 円
pivot
の売り
is
が
going to bear
ある
out.
と
I
するじゃ
think
ない
we
ですか。
stay at
そし
elevated
て、
Fed funds rate well into
売りと
2023,
買
and
い
I think we get the real
を見る
recession.
ときに、
James, just to push back, a lot of people would
オ
say
ファーであ
you're so
る
gloomy.
その
Everyone
50
on
円
Wall
を
Street is
積
so
極的
gloomy,
に
and yet
買
you're
ってる
seeing
かどう
earnings
か、
that are hanging in there and
あ
actually
るい
expanding.
は
You're seeing a jobs market,
40
yeah,
円
it's
のビ
going
ットを積
gangbusters.
極
That's a
的に売
good
って
thing.
る
You're
か
seeing
ど
an
うか
economy that's
の違いで
resilient.
す。
Why can you not be optimistic?
わかるかな？
A couple things on that, and it's a fair point. Earnings were better, but what you
買い
see
の
in
人が
earnings
多
is you see
いってこ
price.
と
You
は
don't see
50
units,
円が
and
トレ
that's
ー
a
ドさ
big
れている
difference.
こ
You're
と、
not seeing a higher
50円が一
volume
番
of goods
よくトレー
going
ドさ
through.
れ
You're
てい
seeing
る。
the price level being accepted
で、
by
40
markets,
円
and
ビ
that
ット
can
がそ
exist
んな
for
にトレードされ
a
ていない。
time as long as the consumer
という
balance
こと
sheet
は、
is healthy,
50
which
円
is
がすごい
turning
買わ
at
れ
the
ているってこ
margin
と
worse. We're
です。
seeing savings rates drop. We're
それ
seeing
でわかるか
credit
な？
expansion, credit balances increase. We're seeing charge-offs increase. So the point that I would make is if labor rolls over, which it may, if we have this demand
理解
destruction,
力
we
ね、
continue to
差し
see
引き21枚
claims
買ってる
pick
人
up,
が多いっていう
the
ことで、そ
consumer's
の
not going to
ニュー
be
スは
quite
売
as
って
good
る
a
人が
shape
い
as
な
I
いと
think
買えない。
markets believed.
Richard,
そうなんだけども、
So I think, Lisa, there's a couple of things you
それ
mentioned
は、
earnings there. I think there's only two certainties that I would argue we have as we go through the
オ
remainder
ファー
of
の
this
人が
year into
受け
early
身になっ
next
てい
year.
る。
Number one is the Fed's likely to be
だ
tightening.
から、
Maybe
オファー
today
の
you
人
could
は
argue
積極的
not
じ
as
ゃなく
certain
て、オ
as,
ファーの
as
人は
maybe you
自
were a
分で
month
待って
ago, but
い
that's
て、
still pretty certain the Fed's going to be tightening.
買っ
And
てる
number
人が
two,
積極的にオファー
profits
の
are
枚
going to
数を
be
買っている。
decelerating. I think that's the big story. Earnings growth in the S&P is still about 25% on a trailing
それでわか
four-quarter
りますか
gap
ね。
basis. We're actually predicting we're going to see a profits recession first half next year. I think the real weakness in the economy comes next year. I don't think we're there right now. And so I think to some extent there's a little bit of a head fake going on right now where people thinking that everything's calming down, everything's fine, we can go back and speculate in the markets. I'm not quite sure it's such an easy story as that.
Does today move the needle at all, Richard, for you? Do you change any of your allocations or your views based on the print we just got?
No, I don't think so. Look, Lisa, the Fed is still historically behind inflation. If you look at the real Fed funds rate, which throughout my entire 40-year career, everybody said that was the gauge that you used to tell if the Fed was tight or easy. The real Fed funds rate right now is about minus 6%. That is historically low. The only time it was lower and more negative was in the last several months. But we're still in no man's land for a negative real Fed funds rate. I find it very hard to argue that the Fed is actually an inflation fighter with a historically negative real Fed funds rate.
James, final word.
Well, it's not an uninvestable market, Lisa. As you know, the dividend story has played out beautifully for the year. The payers and the growers, the more defensive equity names have performed brilliantly versus the non-payers or the aspirational growth. And the bond market, from an income perspective, is as generous as it's been in a while, despite the rally in July. We have good corporate bond spreads. We have BBB type names, quality companies, free cash flow traded in 4.5% yields. And the muni bond market has caught a bid in July. So the bond market seems to have found its footing in the certain pockets of the equity market. market that are absolutely investable, particularly for income-oriented people.
Richard Bernstein, James Camp, both of you are sticking with us. Right now we want to take a look at some of the stocks on the move, and they are very much on the move with the NASDAQ strong, more than 2% rally. Abigail Doolittle here with more. Abby.
Hey, Lisa. Well, yes, we do have stocks very much on the move. On that good news is good news CPI report. This, of course, means that yields have come in. That's helping out big tech, launching the markets higher. We have the likes of Apple up 1.5%. Banks rallying too, though, as the yield curves start to steepen a little bit. JP Morgan Chase up 1.4%. Tesla has the technology component, and it also has the fact that Elon Musk has sold $6.9 billion worth of Tesla in preparation for the possibility that he's forced to buy Twitter. And then finally, this is probably the most interesting one in a way, Lisa. Coinbase up 1.6% in the pre-market, down sharply. This, of course, after they disappointed with their user forecasts and revenues. But Bitcoin is now higher on this better than expected CPI report. That's helping Coinbase at this point. So this morning, really a risk on.
Thank you so much. Coming up, slower inflation providing the administration with some relief ahead of midterms.
This is the fastest decline in gas prices in over a decade. Nearly $1 drop in just 56 days.
That conversation is still ahead as we see the rally continuing on the heels of that weaker than expected CPI report. This is Bloomberg.
With consistently high ESG performance tend to score 2.6 times higher on total shareholder return than medium ESG performers. But 59% of finance executives say that their companies have not launched a new mission or strategy to address sustainability in the last 18 months.
Sustainability is the new digital. It's time for CFOs to step up and play an active role in driving the business forward to deliver value for people and planet, stakeholders, as well as for shareholders.
Take the world by cloud. Accenture, let there be change.
We believe in the power of ideas.
スペースの皆様もこれ聞いたときにどういった意味かわかりますか？なんとなく。難しいんだよね。初めて見る人はね、ちょっとわかんないんだけども、要するに積極性ですよね。積極的にオファーであるものをもう待てないからどんどん買っていくのか、それが買い越しになります。で、売り越しはその反対で、もう売りたくてしょうがないから直近のビットを思いっきりこう売っていくっていう、そうすると売り越しになるっていう。積極性が違うでしょう。で、そこで、買い越しと売り越しがそういうとこで分かってくるっていうことです。
Season continues.
Caution out there.
It's a ball of doubt.
Earnings are cranking away.
But the problems are still with us.
Bloomberg breaks the numbers first.
We're getting some big numbers.
We got Beyond Meat, we got Monster Beverage.
Block, the artist formerly known as Square. Glencore more than doubled to a record, the highest earnings in its history.
With exclusive expert analysis.
What a disaster that stock has been.
25% growth. Clearly, DoorDash is taking share here.
それが分かるように色付けをしてありまして、積極的に買われると緑になるように設定されています。で、その反対に売りが多くなると今度は赤くなる設定になっています。そうすると分かりやすいから。
but prices are
そうする
coming
とさ、
down, and the president will
下の方を
continue
見
to
る
call
と
on domestic and international oil
27,900 円
producers
から下、
Gas prices
か
in
なり
America falling
緑
daily
だら
since
けじゃ
their
ないです
peak
か。
in
だから
June. 56
この
straight
辺、
declines.
た
Gasoline
くさ
prices
ん
falling
一生懸命
7.7%
買っ
in
て
the
った人
latest
が多いんだな
CPI
っていうの
report
こ
for
れでわか
July.
る
That
ん
is
だ
the
ね。
most going back to 2020, April of
だ
that
から
year.
こういうの見
EIA
て、
is
あ、
lowering its production forecast for the year,
27,900
expecting a
円
decline in
とその
gasoline
下は
demand.
底
Breaking this
堅い
all
んだ
down
ね。
for us, Bloomberg's Emily Wilkins down in
こういうのがわ
DC
かるん
and
です
Julian
ね。
Lee in London to really
ただ、
understand the dynamics here. Emily, how much can this
28,50 円
administration
過ぎて
claim
くる
credit to
と、
this versus the demand
まあ
destruction
ミニは
that
なん
the
かまだ
EIA is
買いが入ってるん
reflecting
だけ
as
ど
a
も、ラ
result
ー
of
ジを
just
見る
simply
と
high prices
ピン
curing
クに
high
なっている
prices?
のは、まあ、赤に
But the
近い
Biden
ピンクと。
administration is going to count this one as a win.
ピ
They're
ンクに
going
なっ
to
たり緑に
message
なったり
it
しま
as
す
a
けど、
win.
拮抗してるん
But
で、
in reality, they still know that inflation is incredibly high for many
赤色に
Americans.
近
That this
く
doesn't
な
suddenly
れ
mean
ば、
that people are going to
売
go to the
り、
grocery store and be
もっ
like,
と売り
oh,
が
thank
来てるっ
goodness,
ていうの
the
はわかるん
prices
だ
are
けど、
back
ピンク
down
ってのは
again.
まあちょっと
It's still going to be an issue they're going to
拮
have
抗
to
して
deal
い
with
て、
throughout
まだこ
basically
う、
the next several months and
ビ
into
ッ
the
トを
November
売ってる
election.
人
So
が
I think
若
you're
干
going
多い
to
って
see the
い
White
う、
House
そういう感じで
continue
す
to
ね。だ
highlight
か
the
ら
bright spots in
少
the
しは、
economy, the jobs report, the
50
lower
円
gas
に、
prices,
ラージ
this
に戻
month's
すと、
CPI data.
利確
But
が
they
入ってるの
really
かなっ
know
ていうの
that
がこういうの。
overall they are still going to have to continue to message on what they want to do. And at least now they can say from a messaging standpoint that they do have these larger legislative package, like the bill with semiconductors as well as the climate and tax bill that the House is set to pass on Friday. They can say, look, we are trying to do stuff to bring down costs. Here's legislation that we've moved. And in that way, they can really try to explain that they are trying to do something, that they are taking action. They're not just sitting in Washington unable to move anything.
And Julian, how much can they claim this victory
まあ
as
で
we
も
look
しかし、
into a season where
高
prices
値
could
圏
still
で
go up
ね、
pretty significantly?
推移して
How
ます
much
ね、
are
まだ。
people
ま
talking
だマーケッ
about
ト
a
入ってないか。
reversal in the declines
これからなんだ
versus a
ね。
stickiness of this deceleration in price?
もうちょっとなんか上行きそうだな。
factors here that are very much working off against each other. One of them is the economy, forecasts of a slowdown, and the demand destruction that we are sort of starting to see, at least in some of the data. The other side is obviously the supply side. We've got EU sanctions on Russian oil exports that come into effect in December. So that could, if it doesn't take oil off the market, it's certainly going to make it necessary to transport it longer distances from Russia to markets in Asia. So that's going to add supply pressure. We've got OPEC Plus, who agreed an output increase for September of just 100,000 barrels a day. You can't really measure that kind of an increase in many countries. And I think that signals, firstly, that they are very worried about the amount of spare capacity that they have, and as that spare capacity shrinks, that puts more nervousness around production, and that would tend to push prices higher. And I think we're going to continue to see some quite volatile movements in crude oil prices, particularly over the next month or so when trading is relatively thin over the summer. So, you know, a few traders moving one direction or the other can have a big impact on prices.
Julian Lee, Emily Wilkins, thank you both so much. And don't miss our interview with National Economic Council Director Brian Deese coming up here in just about 10 minutes. We are seeing oil fluctuate, WTI down about 0.3% after surging and then being down more than 1%. Richard Bernstein and James Camp back with us. Oil very much front and center when it comes to this story. As I said before, gasoline prices fell 7.7% in July after rising 11.2% the month earlier. Very hard to get your arms around, James. How are you positioning given some of the oil fluctuations and what you're expecting in terms of the sustainability of the declines we've seen?
Well, the key to positioning, Lisa, for us has been to be a little bit more aggressive in the bond market, because this sort of demand destruction or fall in energy, I think, is representative of a global slowdown. And so for us, it has been rotating out of risk assets, meaning stocks, underweight the equity side, an increase in allocation to the fixed side, which really occurred mid-June, kind of coincident with, we think, the secular peaks in the 10-year was. We look at the oil story more on a demand destruction global slowdown than it is some sort of policy win, if you will, in terms of getting more energy to more people. And the other part of the energy story for us, the food and energy story really is consumers have been dealing with this for a long time. And when you go into a Fed tightening cycle with those two things elevated, energy and food stuff, you almost always, if the data that I'm looking at are correct, you fall into recession. And we think that's the story that's going to be dominating as we move into the back half of the year in early 2023.
That's fascinating, especially as you see food prices continuing to climb. In the CPI report, they increased almost 11% from a year ago, the most going back to 1979, not exactly a historical analog that you want to see. Richard, from your perspective, do you take the oil price decline, the gasoline price decline, as a signal, or is it noise? Is it reflective of people's belief in what will come, or is there true demand destruction and a true weakening in the economic outlook that you can then trade on?
So, Lisa, I think just broadening out a little to commodities overall, there's been a lot of people who have said that the worst in the commodities space is behind us. That's a very good sign for inflation going forward. I think it's a little early to, if I can harken back to the mission accomplished sign, I think it's a little early to put that banner up right now, given that China's been in a lockdown. Look, if China's economy is hitting on all 8 cylinders, or even 6 of 8 cylinders, and commodity prices are falling, I think we have something. But the fact that China's been in lockdown and commodity prices are falling, I don't see why that's insightful. I don't understand why that's a signal of anything other than China shut down. If you look at something like copper demand has started to go up. Copper imports into China have started to go up again. You know, that may be a harbinger of things to come yet. So certainly, you know, it's encouraging politically. I understand that, but I think from an investing point of view, you want to be a little careful. So what we've been doing is kind of straddling, if you will, one foot in the late cycle sectors of energy and materials and industrials, and the other foot in the defensives, you know, things like consumer staples and healthcare and utilities. I think what's very interesting is that most discussions focus on should you be in cyclicals or should you be in growth. Nobody talks about defensives, but in periods when profits decelerate, the Fed's tightening, that's the group that very often does quite well.
Richard Bernstein, James Camp, to both of you, thank you so much on this day of a CPI reprint that is very much changing market expectations right now. I'm very much looking at the dollar in particular, plunging, weakening, I should say, the most going back at one point to November 2020 as people assess how much the Fed could potentially back off from their rate hikes. Coming up, the morning calls and later the White House continuing its fight against inflation. We'll speak with the National Economic Council Director Brian Deese at the opening bell, plus a conversation with G Squared's Victoria Green. Right now, we are continuing to see that rally. 7 minutes to the opening bell. This is Bloomberg.
S&P とかどうなんですか S&P Mini Futures。OK。これを見ると。
You will put a woman on Mars.
あ、そうだ。これをね、見てほしいんですよ。
You will be the first chief crypto officer.
まあ、S&P の
Because when you subscribe to Bloomberg,
ミニ
you won't just get news.
先物ですけど
You'll
も
get insight into limitless possibilities,
僕もがこれね、
knowledge, and
冷やしです
inspiration to feed your
デ
ambition.
イリー冷や
So
し
before you
なんですけ
invent,
ども
pioneer, disrupt,
雲の上
before you
に
change
ね
the world,
ちょうど出てきて
Bloomberg.
今日の指標でまた
We
パン
believe
と
in
上が
the
ったの
power of ideas. That's why we launched
ちょっとね、この
Bloomberg
緑
New
の線から
Economy
上に出てるでしょ
Catalyst.
これがだから
This
ちょっと買
platform
われ
will
すぎ
help
てる
them
から
share their ideas
まあ
to reshape our world.
売られる要因だと思うんですけど
Breakthrough
も
action. Bloomberg
僕
New
が
Economy Catalyst.
着目してるのがこの角ですね8月11日がこの角になってその次を見ると斜面になってるでしょこの雲がカーッとね下に行ってるんですということは日足のウォータースライディングがあるかもしれないラジオの音がでかいあ、本当ごめんライディアのウォーターが大きすぎるじゃあねこれしようか全く聞こえなくなったけど何ですかHI さんどうもはじめましてなんか新しい言い方が出てきてねなかなか ユーミングさん、どうもどうも。40円から60円はこんなに買いが熱いということは、想像されないと思うんで。これだよなぁ。上がってるし。そうだね。これはワーキングオーダーではなく、実際にトレードした枚数です。だから過去形です。売った買ったですから。売った枚数、買った枚数です。だからこれ今、ね、枚数増えてるでしょ。だからこれ、今、フォロー90円。90円を今、92枚買って、160円買って、今320枚買って、327枚買って、66枚売ってって、そういう感じ。95円今、66、68枚買った。トータルね。95円が今、79枚買った。そういうことです。あ、ワイワイさんどうもこんばんは。音変わらないですよ。本当？ Oh my god。あれか。ちょっと待って、じゃあ。これが。
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
デスクトップの音はこれでかいからこうすればいい。こんな感じではどうでしょう。変わった？変わってない。もっとでかい声で言った方がいい。マイクはどこにあるんだじゃん。でもね、あんまり、夜遅いんであんまりでかい声出したくないんですよ。うちの家内がうるせえっつってくる。うちの奥さんがね、たまにね、うるさいとか言う。うるさいとか言ってくるからね、あんま怖いんですよ。ごめんね。うちの奥さん以上怖い人いないからね。ほら、日経のこのラージもまた買ってきてるしね。ダメだこれ。100円か。なんつったっけ俺、150円が次のレベルだっつったっけ 180円か。まあいいや、これ、ウォータースライダーがね、11日の日からだから12とかが、だから金曜日がね、危ういんだよ、マーケット。うん。ということで、あとは、もしかしたら風邪ひいて、聞こえにくくなっているかも。そうしたら、なんそれ、コシアジャン祈願。牛舎なんとかなんとかなの。なんかね、聞こえなくなってきてるのかなよくわかんないけど。あ、マーケットがでもなんかすごいなんか勢いでまた上に行ってますけども。でもラージ見て500枚以下なんだよ。買い越し。売りが入ってんだよね。だからラージ。ミニが 19,800 円。800枚で買い越し、買い幅がすごい増えてんだけど、だから、ミニは、短期的な動きなんだよね。で、短期的にわっと浮くんだけど、それを見たラージはどっちかって言えば、行き過ぎだと思って売ってくるんだよね。面白いでしょこのミニとラージのこの兼ね合いっていうかね。平均単価を 26,940 円で上げました。大丈夫でしょうか言われてもな。まあ、26,940 円。 ちょっと待って。ウィークリー。ウィークリーの日経見てみましょうか。ウィークリーの日経。
This will be the first time this year where we've had a gain on the day of the CPI print, really speaking again to the fact that coming in less than is good news for both the markets and inflation for real consumers. Microsoft, as a result, benefiting up 2.3%. This is yields come in.
ウィークリーを見ると意外とね、
just slightly up about 0.3%. Oil at this point is down a little bit, but not weighing too much on Chevron.
これがウィークリーなんだけども、ちょうどこの雲の中入ってんだよね。こっから上に抜けるかどうかなんだけども、意外と失速してそのまんま下に行くのかなと私は思ってるんですけどね。うん。そう。そうすると、少なくとも 26,460 円まで落ちる計算でもあるんです。でれれれれれれれ。売られてるし、ほら、見てこれ。ほら、ミニだから、ミニってほら、すごい短期だから、調子によって買うとやばいんだよね。すぐこうやって反落するから。で、それをちゃんと把握してたのがラージなんだね。だからラージが先に利確が入るんだよ。ね、そういうことでしょ。
At one point down the most, going back, if you look at the BBDXY index, going back to the year 2020, how much can we start to see this add to the risk on element that we have here? Just to walk you through the data that we're looking at.
ラージが今、結構もう、あれだよ。ほら、買い越し幅227枚です、これ。結構売りが入ってきてるってこと。どうしよう。何がどうしよう。いやいやいやいや、何を考えてる。いやいやいやいやいや。自分も売ろうかと思ってるんだけど。なるほど。あ、これ売り要因だ。このね、見えるかな？これがさ、皆さん見えるこれ。この黄色いラインが、まずこの白いのがケルトナチャンネルなんですよ。で、この黄色がカルフマンインジケーター。カルフマンがケルトナを超えたら行き過ぎっていうね、ことなんですよ。ということは、これもうどんどん売っていいっていう話です。ああ、これ見過ごした。カルフマン、黄色い線が白の線より上行ったら買われすぎってことです、これ。だから、売っていいよってこと。うん。これアルゴリズムでも使ってるやつだからね。信憑性ありますよ。どうしよう。じゃあ売れようって自分でそんなこと言うんだったら。8月12日に満月の、あ、そっか。満月で相場がおかしくなるか。なるほど。まあ、これもな、もう一回上がったら売っていいのかな、これ。なんかそんな気がした。あとは、ちょっと、 これがいいか。ケルトナ。
One of the strongest labor market recoveries ever in American history, and we're seeing that labor market strength continue. That means that with jobs, people have opportunities to better paying jobs and better paying opportunities for the American economy.
売りシグナル出てます。ほら。売り。これがね、1時間足です。1時間ケルトナが売りシグナル出してます。1時間足のシグナルなんで、まあそこそこ使い勝手いいかな。まだ明日休みだからほら、明日の朝まで明日の朝までトレーディングしたいっていう人、どうぞ売ってくださいっていうのが出てますんで、まあ自己責任でお願いします。まあそれなりにほら売られてきたでしょね。日経とダウは分かりにくいけどナスダックは下げるしかなそうに見える。そうやね。でこれを見ると、ほらもうラージが13枚買い越し、もうほぼフラット。すごいねラージ。売りが入ってるってことだよこれ。でミニが 16,371 枚買い越し。ほら、かなりまた下がってきた。利確入ってますよ、先生。これ。やっぱりあれじゃないですか。ケルトナ効果じゃないですか、これ。カルフマンだっけ？カフマンじゃなくてカルフマンだっけ？間違った。カルフマンとケルトナを使ってるんですよ。で、2つ合わせてカルケルって言ってるんですけども。カルケルインジケーターって言ってるんですけども。これ私が最近なんだろう自分でこう考えた手法のやつです。ケルトナのチャンネルの間にカルフマンの線を走らせるようにしたんです。わかんない人はね、見てください。カルフマンとケルトナ。調べるとすごいよ。もともとこの、チャートの一部なんですけども、出てきたの、これが開発されたのが1960年です。だから随分前のやつなんだけども、もうその時からそのアルゴリズムとして使われている、なんだろうな、指標テクニカル指標です。はい。だから昔からあるやつです。有名なやつです。カルケル。そう、カルケル。金魚飼ってる人はわかるけどさ、金魚の、水をきれいにするのあれなんだっけなんか似たようなやつだったね。あれなんだっけ金魚のやつ。This is a bill that will actually contribute to additional deficit reduction, which is complementary to what the Fed is trying to do, and help us move through this transition in a way where we don't have to give up all of those economic gains. That's the right economic prescription right now. It's why we're working so hard to get it done and in place. And if we do that, we're going to be better positioned to navigate through this transition and get to that period of steady, stable growth than any other country in the world.
Brian, has this administration done everything that it can to bring down inflation?
あれはカルキ抜きか。金魚の水をきれいにするやつ。カルキ抜きです。こんばんは。 CPI の前に指数が上がっていた情報も得たんですかね。いや違うと思います。結局もうもともと先月が今回みたいに弱いだろうって言ったのがすごい強かったんで、もう強いのがちょっと続いたんで、今回はさすがにね下がってるでしょうっていう、そういう思惑だったと思いますよ。 で、原油価格もすごい下がってるから、そう、だから、漏れてはいないと思いますね。あとは本当に高かったら政府がまた前回みたいに高いから気をつけろって言うんだけども、今回は何も言わなかったから、じゃあ低いんだねってみんな思ったらしいです。ものすごく勉強になります。カルキルですか？カルキルじゃなくて。でも、このカルキルはすごいでしょ？ねえ。結構私好きなんですよ、これ。マイナスになったよ。ラージのマーケット、売り越し44枚になりました。これ指標が出て、パーンと上がったとき800枚ぐらいあったのよ。ね、買い越し800枚とか言ってませんでした、私。それがもう、今はもうマイナスだったってことは、この高値圏で売ってる人が少なくとも800枚以上いるってことだ。売り越し。でしょ？だから、マイナスだったんだよ。カルキ。そうだね。カルキ抜き。金魚のやつ。それに似てるなと思って。カルケル。そうでもないか。ごめんなさいね。あんまり関係なかったね。余計なこと言って。申し訳ない。ダメだな、こんなこと言ってたら。バカにされちゃう。これでもいいでしょ、これ。売りシグナル。もともとここから売りだったから、このレベルまで来るとやっぱり近くなると売りになってくるんだろうね。で、この失速すればこっちこう来るから。まあでもどっちにしろね。インフレ要因は別にそんな変わったわけじゃないからって。これもう一回上がって、もう一回この70円、80円まで来たら売ってもいいのかなっていう感じですかね。どうなんでしょう。今40円だけど。またこうやって戻してくるから。アメ株初めて見る買い一色。すげえ。1.0。そうなんだ。それはすごいな。
Now, I was charting, it was very interesting. This morning I was charting the speed and rate of change of CPI here in 2021 and 22 versus the 1972, 73. And we have gone up much faster than if you look at the chart of CPI in the 70s. And so the question is, will we see a fast reversal or are we going to end up plateauing?
ゼロみたいな。S&P でいいか。
Inflation is hard to beat.
Victoria Green, you're going to be sticking with us, and we're going to dive more into that. But coming up, President Biden pushing for more domestic semiconductor.
わ、やばい。先生、これ。先生、これ。飛行石が出てます。飛行石が出てる。どうしよう。飛行石が出てるときはなんて言うんだっけ。天空の城。ラピュタだっけバブルスバルズブなんだっけバブルスって言わないと落ちてこないよこれ。これはなんか飛行石が出てるからねこれ。 どうするんでしょう、これ。これは何 ?15 分足だからな。短期だから、長続きはしないよ、でも。バルス。ちょっとな、これ上に行き過ぎてるな。4時間足。飛行石は開催員です。そうですね、開催員ですね。ここにも出てるでしょ。なんかでもね、でもなんか高値圏で買うっていうのも嫌なんですよ。ね。まあ、こういう風にほら、こうなってる。でも結局、高値圏になってるから、売られてるでしょ、結局はね。だから、高くなってもちょっと売られやすいようになるっていうね。うん。バルス。バルス。4時間足。こうやって見ても、ちょっとなぁ、行き過ぎのような気がするんだよなぁ。ジリリリリ。お、やべ。これが今日経ですけどね。うん。ラージがプラスの2枚。ほとんどフラットです。ミニが17,000枚の買い越し。だからミニ手動で買われてますよねって。どうなんだろう、これ。もう11時ですか。でもほら、こうやってピンクが増えてるでしょ、ラージに。売られやすいと思うんだけどね。換算相場に売りなし。水色は売り買い拮抗ですか。水色は一番約定が多いってとこだけです。うん。だから、計算すればいい。ほら、売りが7,667枚で、買いが6,194枚だから、これは、売りが多いってことですね。この価格は。40円ですけど。約定が一番多い売り買い合わせると、それが40円っていうことです。そう。だから、これしょっちゅう変わりますよ、この水色は。約定が、多いところに移るんで。And a broader sense that demand for consumer electronics through to data centers is falling off, and that in turn is also stoking recession fears. The $52 billion number from the White House appears to be a big number, but the reality is that ありがとうございます。いや、とんでもないです。
capacity for manufacturing of semiconductors takes many, many years. The $52 to $53 billion figure is also nothing compared to the capex plans of a number of Asia-based chip manufacturers who are moving simply much more quickly. And
28,000円上行って、上が何 28,100 円で、その間、うろうろしてるから、結局は狭いレンジで推移してるっていうことで、そんなに値動きはそんなないっていう感じでしょうか。VIX いいところが下がってるんですけど。なるほどね、VIX ね。やだね。VIX のじゃあさ、なんだっけ。VVX だっけ。見てみようか。
Value is still a good place to be, and this is more a bear market reversal rally than June being the true bottom, especially with tech seeing some pressures and semiconductors struggling with potential gaming and PC slowing down. Victoria back with us. Victoria, how much do you double down on this conviction despite the rally, despite some of the reprieve in inflation that we just saw?
VVX.
So I look at the fundamentals and what have really been this
volatility の volatility
based on since the June lows, and it was a sentiment-based rally, maybe a technical-based rally, but it certainly really wasn't on earnings and company fundamentals. And so I look at this and I say, what does the CPI print mean for earnings going forward? Does it move me off the sidelines? I say, one, no, we're still in a tightening cycle. Two, yes, the U.S. dollar may moderate some, but we're still seeing a very strong U.S. dollar, which multiple
volatility VIX volatility index.
And then three, we have a lot of
volatility の volatility で。
You know, how bullish, bearish are the Fed going to be, and what's going to happen with unemployment. So we look around and we still feel like it's a contracting world, and this is a very confusing market. You have some data points saying it's a strong market, but you know, you have a tight labor market, you have low unemployment, you have a stock market that's coming off its lows, and the stock market's a leading indicator. So maybe everything we're looking at is backwards data and we're late and behind. But if I look at fundamentals, I still see a lot of headwinds. I'm just not comfortable chasing risk yet. I get it. The meme stocks, the ARK funds, the techs, that's been the major rally point coming off the lows. But if you look under the hood at the numbers, the number of companies that are warning, the number of companies that are downgrades and earning revisions that we've seen, and the expectation on the second half, I'm just a little reluctant to chase into this.
下がってるね。確かに。
So we're going to ride this wave a little bit. I'm just not throwing all in. I'm not going to go all in when I don't have anything supporting this on the fundamental side.
Just quickly, Victoria, what are you looking for to change your view? What data point, what development?
ここまで来ちゃってるからね。これをだから週足で見るとどうなんだ。
I see this as a potential temporary. So yes, I'd like to see company fundamentals, their ability to grow earnings, their outlook for earnings be a little bit more cheerful. Honestly, I'm concerned about global growth. You know, what's going to happen in Europe with gasoline? If Europe sneezes and gets
週足のVIXを見ると
Are we in a recession? I think there's too many data points that aren't bullish right now.
邪魔じゃない？いい？下にね、下の方に行こうとしてる。そうするとね、あんまりなんだろう、どっちかって言えば相場が結調する要因ですよね。ズバリ教えてください。月末どこまで下がりますか？来週からの先もね。来週からの先物、月末どこまで下げますか？ワイワイさん。いやー、だから、さっき見たじゃあ、週足、これでいいか。これでいくと、ちょっと待って。今どこ？これ30円か。 この雲からちょっと抜けらんないんじゃないかと思ってるんですけどね。うん。だから結局これ失速してこっちまで行くと思うんですよ。そうすると何？来月の話したらこれ9月のこの辺になって、マジ、だからそれこそ25,000円割れるような局面まで行っちゃうんじゃないかなと。なぜかっていうと、この雲のこの下まで来ちゃうからね。うん、で、ここで失速するとかなり下に下がるから。そう。月末、だから25,000円か25,000円割れるかでしょうか。その辺でしょうかね。要するにこれですよ、この。ハイライター、これでいいのか。いや。こういう動きなんでしょ、これ。で、こうなんじゃないかと思って。ちょっと待って。こういう動き。トリプルトップか、ヘッド&ショルダー、ヘッド&ショルダーじゃないな、これな。ショルダーとヘッドがだいたい似たような位置にあるんで、トリプルトップで雲の下をガーっていっちゃうっていう。これはかなり効いて、だから25,000までいっちゃうんじゃないかななんて思ってます。どうでしょう。ほら、マーケットも結構売られてきたよ、今。ラージが23枚の利越し。保持します。いや、あくまでも自己責任でね、お願いしますよ。NK さんが言ったからとか言って。でも売られてきたじゃん。この辺売りだって言った時に売るべきなんだろうな。やっぱりな、そういう時はね。待っちゃいけないんだよな、このだって。売りサインで売った分利確しました。ありがとうございます。さっきのケルトナのやつ ?1 時間足のやつ本当？それよかった。当たればね、嬉しいよね。当たんなかったらどうしようと思っちゃうけども。それも自己責任でお願いしますね。いいでしょ、でも、このケルトナ。 で、今ほら、この黄色いサインが、ね、白のサインの内側に入ってきたでしょ。ね、だからまあ、もう、売りは終わりっていうか、そのチャンスはもうなくなっちゃったね。ギャンブル楽しいです。そうですか。今週末25,500円までいけそうです。まあね。物の考えによっちゃね。そういうこともあるんでしょうかなと思うけどもね、と。今週末いや、でも、勢いがあったら、マジで勢いあったら、これ、27,000。まあ、要するに、私はしたけど、さっきこう下に行くって話だけど、じゃなくて反転して、ここ、雲を抜けるとそれなりに力つくんで、ここぐらいまで行くんですよ。結構。そうすると28,740円ぐらいまで行きますよ。もしね、勢いついたらね、上に。ただ、上に行った場合に、ほら、今度この雲が下、右肩下がりなんで、それなりにまたインパクトがあるんですよね。そうすると、週足のウォータースライディングが起きるっていう。すごいね。こうだからね。うん。でも、それが起きずに、多分、こっちの方に行っちゃうのかなと私は思ってるんですけど。それはわかんないけどね。大きな下げが来る場合、引き金は何だと思うんですか？大きな下げが来る場合、引き金は、なんだろうな。
We're market repricing for a soft landing. Now you're looking at 50 bips for September. You're obviously seeing the front end, seeing a lot of buying.
意外とね、
Is that the right market reaction?
つまんないとこかもしれないよ。アメリカのレーバーデーが終わった後とか、レーバーデーホリデーが過ぎて、子供の休みが終わるでしょ？で、学校が始まるじゃない。その時にやっぱり大人も、やっぱりもう夏休み終わったから、ね、年末に向けていろいろと考えなきゃいけないから、そうすると、やっぱり、今日はその指標そんなに強くなかったから、まあ、安心してマーケット買われたけど、それでも別にインフレは懸念っていうのがまあ変わってないからね。インフレはまだ残ってるでしょうし、そもそもこうやって株が上がっちゃうと良くないのは、フェッドの人がマーケットは打たれ強いから全然これどんどん金利上げても大丈夫だと思って金利上げてくると思うんですよ。そうするとそれがかえって変な方向になってくるんで、意外とそれがその後々影響してくると思うんですよ。うん。そういうのもあって、それを気にする人たちも出てくると思うんですよね。そうすると、レーバーデーが終わって、年末のことを考える人たちが増えると、そのパラダイムシフトっていうかね、心理的に物事をちょっとね、違う風に考えるようになってくるんで、それが起きると、意外とマーケットがガタッとね、下がったりするんです。だからそういうとこかななんて。人の心理ですよね。なんかそういった心理学を勉強してる人がそんなことこの前言ってたんで、ああ、なるほどね、と思いました。でも、ちょっと待って。そんなことを言ってる間に28,000割ってるじゃないですか、先生。この辺売りなんだよって自分で言っときながら自分で何もできなくて。このチャンネル見てる人が、売って、儲かった、ありがとうございます、とか言って。 まあいいですけどね。いいですけどね。やっぱりインジケーター的に良かったな。ケルトナ。ね、だからこの黄色い線が白い線よりも、このミニでもそうでしょこれ。ほら、これ出てるでしょこれはもう要注意。もう変わりすぎっていうことなんで、そうするとこういうことが起きるわけですよ。で、これめったに外に出てこないから、このカルフマンだっけ。カルフマンラインは。黄色い線が白の線よりもはみ出て出ることは、かなりの、その変わりすぎっていうのがある。で、そういうのを私はこれ設定したんで、わざわざ。そういうのがわかるように。だから今後ね、これを皆さん見ていきましょうということです。スペースの皆さんはちょっと見えてないけど、まあ、雰囲気的に想像していただければ。っていうか私は言いますんで。カルフマンの黄色いラインが、ケルトナチャンネルの外側に出てきたって。何の話やって。何の話してるんですかってなっちゃうけど。
Do we get to, the Bloomberg economics and along 5%, or do we stay, kind of in this 3.5% area, where I think the market is pretty comfortable that the Fed's going to get there, but they're not convinced that the economy is going to hold up enough for them to go to 4.5%. But again, we're still missing, and I think the market's still missing the fact that the underlying trends to a lot of
じゃあ、ラージはどうなってるか。
still very strong and very upward, and as soon as the market starts
てれ
to
ん。
you'll wind up probably going the other way and see this massive range
売り越し208枚じゃないですか、もうラージが。
range in terms of the rates market at least.
ミニが買い越し14,400枚。これもだんだん売られてきた。買い越し幅が若干下がってきてます。
Well, I don't think it's the market's perception isn't going to be much different than the Fed's. I think what they want to see in particular is core inflation measures starting to roll over, and we haven't seen that yet. Maybe we're seeing it stabilize, but we haven't seen a downtrend in core inflation yet. And you still have some, oddities, and Mike knows better than I do, but some oddities within the CPI report, things like owner's equivalent rent and rent of shelter, that are probably still going to drag core inflation up at least for another few months. So until you see core inflation start to trend lower, I think the Fed is still going to be a little bit nervous that you're going to have, somewhat sticky inflation.
Mike, then to that point, what's sticky that then becomes permanent?
Well, that's a good question. The Fed has been expecting a lot of things to roll over, and nothing is permanent, but as Ira mentioned, housing is going to be the big issue. It's going to last for a while because it takes a very long time to get into and out of the CPI. Owner's equivalent rent up 0.6%, still very strong. Now, it'd be interesting. We get the PCE number at the end of the month, and that's the inflation figure that the Fed targets. And housing has a smaller role in that indicator. So if we see a decline in other things,
買い戻しを考えている人は、結局このケルトナーチャンネルのこの下回ってくると今度は売られすぎなんで、短期的にね。で、そこを買い戻すと。で、それで一番いいんじゃないですかね。もしまだこの辺でしようと思ってる人は。と思いますよ。結局この白い線より上行ったら売りで、下行ったら買いでっていう、そういうやり方ですよ。YouTube ライブの最初に流してていけてる音楽なんですか？8月9日昨日流したっけ？いけてる音楽だっけ？なんかあったっけ？チェンチェンチェンチェンチェンチェンチェンチェンチェン。 なんだろうね。なんか長いやつだっけ。昨日の
then that's good. But it is hard to have a lot of faith in that kind of prediction at this point.
Yeah, no doubt. Guys, thanks a lot. Really, really appreciate it. Bloomberg's Michael
忘れちゃいました。なんか長いやつだ。
Always great to get your perspective on CPI day. Well, earlier, we did hear from National
なんかコマーシャルじゃないですか。ブルームバーグの。ちゃうかな。なんだろう。何を流したんだ。
That means that with jobs plentiful, people have opportunities to move into better paying jobs and better paying opportunities. That's a positive thing for the American economy.
And that, of course, leads us to the question of the day. Soft landing? Well, joining us now for her point of view, JH Investments, a co-chief investment strategist, Emily Roll. And Emily, that's a question.
多分、あれですよ。ブルームバーグのコマーシャルに入っているときに、プライス、いろんな各国のプライスが指数とかの先物とかの、価格が出るんですけども、その時に使っているバックグラウンドの音楽だと思います。成り行き注文って意味かな。何がですか。
Probably still has some time to be fully felt in rates. It has some time to be fully felt in earnings estimates. So we've got a ways to go here in order to determine if the Fed can make this happen.
Emily, the knee-jerk reaction around all of this is to buy tech. Is that the right reaction?
Yeah, we think, Guy, that not all tech is created equally. So we're seeing a big divide right now between this renewed bid for lower quality, unprofitable tech companies. That's a part of the market that we can stay away from. The cost of capital is rising. We want companies that make money right now. In fact, we're really emphasizing quality growth companies in the technology space. So those with great cash flow, good return on equity, really durable profitability as the economic growth climate slows. I think that's really critical. Quality should outperform.
これがね、確か冷やしで、これ冷やしなんですよ。で、しかも、9月切り、9月が、基金先物になった時からの累積出来高棒グラフです。そうすると緑が多いからトピックスは買われてるんだよね。9月23日で祝日先物取引ができるようになる。祝日マジそうなの空いてます。マジそういうことか。それもあれだね。サイメックスと CME にボリューム取られないように代償が頑張ってるんだね。はあ、皆さん詳しいですな。まあでも CFD とかできればね、できるしね。この黄色いとこが、トピックスのいわゆるハムレット区です。でれーん。ちょっと広くするよ。そうすると、1946ポイント。で、今が 1942.5 で、結局、上に来てないんでね。だから、1946ポイントまで回復できてないんで、回復これでそのままできないとまた失速ようになるのかなと思います。 一応上まで行ったんだね、これね。でもダメだったんだね。トピックスがだから失速すると、日経もダメになっちゃうんじゃないかな。この1925ポイントとかになれば、あとだから20ポイントぐらい下がったらもうダメですね。ユレイナさん、こんばんは。どうも。
That's the most consequential thing that Congress can do to keep our progress on inflation from getting better.
これがだからトピックスです。じゃあ、
It will bring down the cost of prescription drugs, health insurance premiums, and energy costs. It's going to make big corporations just pay their fair share, nothing more than their fair share. It's going to reduce the deficit without raising a penny in taxes and people making.
こっちの方にディストリビューションが出てきてる。だけど、1920ポイント下がったら今度はこっちの方だから、ね。トピックスが失速したら日経も失速するでしょ。こっちの方来ちゃいます。日経の冷やしを見て、みたいです。はい。日経はね、どれがいいかな。あ、ごめん。どれだっけな。ちょっと待って。
building a stronger economy going forward when he spoke about that CHIPS Act.
これが
A little bit about what's happening in the semiconductor space right now. Bringing back into the conversation Emily Rowland of JH Investment Management.
ラージです。ね、赤だらけでしょ。意外と。売りが多いんだよ。まあでもここら辺買われてるんですけどね。ここだよね。これがね、いくらだったっけな、この。すっごく高くなってる、これ。27,700円。売り越し2,748枚。既存でね。だから、27,700円とか割ってくると、失速モードになるな。そういうことです。700円っていうと、こっからだから何？ほとんどあれか、そうか、300円ぐらい下行かないといけないんだね。オプション取引と思いますが、オプションはね、もうね、立ち上がりのやつが見えないんで、わかんないです。オプション取引で昨日お話ししてたんですが、オプション取引で一番大切なのは何を見たらいいかというと、立ち上がり取引で、最近昔はブルームバーグで見れてたんですけども、最近はね、見れてないんで、どういう取引があるのかわかんないです。それが取れるかどうかちょっと他のベンダーに聞いて今やってますけど、米国指数もドイツもウォータースライダーどうでしょうか。どうなんだろうね。ちょっと待って。これってなんか シンボルサーチ。あ、わけわかんなくなった。余計なことやめよう。こっちに戻そう。ああ、もう随分下がったじゃん。先生。売り損ねた、俺。人にせっかく教えてる間に、売るチャンスなくしちゃったじゃん。カルケルケルカルとか言って、アホなこと言ってたら。ああ。さっきの良かったでしょ？このカルフマンラインが、この黄色いラインがこの白いラインをこうしてたらこれ売り要因ですって言ってたの、私。先生、そうですよ、先生言ってましたよ、私。これがあったら売りですよって。ああ、次ね、これ出たら。皆さんも見てください。教えてくださいよ、これ見て。ちゃんと見てるとき。この時に、黄色いラインが、白いラインは黄色いラインが白いライン上行ってるから、これ売りなんじゃないですかって。教えてくださいよ、皆さんも。ね。稀に、あんまり起きないことだから、これ。カルフマンはずっとこの、間しか通んないから、ほら。ね。だから、ブレないんですよ、あんまり。ほら。それが、外れるときあるから、買われすぎっていうこと。白いのが、ケルトナです。ケルトナ。カルマンが、カルマンだって、カルマンでいいんだっけ？カルフマンじゃなかった？カルマン。カルマンか。カルマンが黄色いラインです。白いのはケルトナです。だから違うんだよ、二つとも。実は。ただ、カルマンがケルトナよりも上に来たら買われすぎだから売り要因だってこと。この音楽だ。そう。だからブルームバーグのあれですよ。プライスを出してる時のバックグラウンドミュージックです。ケルトナ。調べてください。ケルトナ。そしたら1960年からある指標だから。しかもアルゴリズムで使ってるっていうぐらいですから。そう。それでこうやってほら、今度はケルトナのこの白いラインの下来たでしょ？だからこれは下に行き過ぎたんで、今度は買われますよっていう。だから相場がまたね、ちょっと戻してくると思いますよ、これ。先生、買いですか？俺もあんま買いたくないな。目先下見てるから、買うんだったら超短期だけど、今買いのチャンスじゃないと思います。もう上行っちゃったから。ね。どっちかって言えば、上行ったら売りがいいかなって思いますけど。ということで、ちょっと疲れてきましたよ、先生。説明してる間にタイミングを失ってしまった。結局はね、これ買われすぎだったんだよな。こんなに上行っちゃってと思ったら。CPI 良くても結局インフレ高止まっていうことで下げてる。 インフレで変わんないから。うん。
But we've really quickly changed the narrative where the street was super bullish and thought this expansion of demand would be over a multi-year horizon.
フェッドのスタンスはまだ変わらないと思うし、まだまだね、次のいろんな指標とか見なきゃいけないんで。うん。だから、今日で判断はできないでしょうっていうことだと思いますよ。
Is this just a natural unwind of that hoarding back to more natural levels?
Yeah, I think the other piece of commentary, you know, the last quarter seems
まあでも、悲観的に思ってる人多いですし、ヘッジファンドとかかなり、売りに回ってるらしいから、それなりにインパクトは若干どっかであるのかなと思ってます。
This whole issue goes back to 2020 and the pandemic, and basically poor foresight from manufacturers about what would happen with
なんだっけ何の話だっけあ、そうか、ダックスとか。ダックス、ダックス、
Now we're kind of seeing this idea that they perhaps had over-ordered in the midpoint of 2021.
Ed, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. Wonderful reporting as always. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow joining us there. The question really becomes then, how do you re-rate these guys? You saw the semi-index there, the Philly stock semi-index down over the last 2 days. All right, coming up, we're going to go back to that. Whoops, just spilled my water. Awesome. It's Wednesday. You can't make it up. Okay, inflation, we got the inflation report earlier. Markets on the move.
これダックスの、まあ、週足だけど、こういうやつだよね。この先行スパン1と2が重なって右肩下がりでしょ、これ。これがかなり弱いインディケーションだよね。だから今こう上がってるけど、途中まで行ったらもうこれなんか失速要因だよね、これね。うん。あんま良くないね、ダックス。だから、もうちょっと上がったら CFD のダックス売ってもいいかもしれない。これがだから週足で、日足見てみようか、じゃあ。One day. 実際にもうイケポチャ入っちゃってるっていう感じね。ここで一回ウォータースライダーみたいなの入っちゃってね、できてね。んでイケポチャしてちょっと上がってきてるって感じでもどうなんだろうね。米株はだからさっき言いましたよね。これS&P。これのだからこれ4時間足はこれをだから1日日足にするとほら今相場ここにいるんでしょ。で、もう、この辺も崖っぷちじゃん。崖からね、こう、下に落ちるような感じになってくるんじゃないこれ。ウォータースライダーですよ、これ。バコーンって。満月。8月12日満月が危うい。ね。金曜ジブリの日だっけ。バルスが起きるって。バルス。やっぱバルスでしょ。ねえ。で、金曜の、ジブリはあれなの何天空の城なのラピュタだっけマジそれやるのすごくねそれ。 その日に相場がなんか、失速するっていう。すごいね、それも。漫画通りの動きをするわけ。もしかして。恐ろしいね、それ。で、これを見ると、ほら、この、青い線からもう上に行っちゃってるから、ちょっと高すぎんだよね。だから S&P もこれ売っていいかな。これもケルトナだから、私は色を変えましたけど、緑の上はもう売っていい。だからほら。バルス。飛行石。飛行石がありますけど。なるほどね。皆さん楽しくトレーディングできて嬉しいですね。平和だ。平和だ、平和だ。ほら、若干戻したでしょ、これ。ね。やっぱこの辺で売りだったよな。あんまり上行くとやっぱちょっと怖いからね、踏まれるんじゃないかなと思うけど、こういうのはやっぱり思いっきり見て、やっぱり買われすぎなんだっていうインディケーションが出てるから、黙って売るべきなんだよな。そしたら100円。まあ100円で売れるかどうかわかんないけど、これは80円で売ったとしても、どうなの？まあ、80円取れるか取れないかと、そんな感じか。ね。90円とか。そんなうまくいかない。日経に関してはもう50円ぐらい取れたらいいんじゃないのね。そう思いますよ。OK。じゃあ、お休みしていいですか？お休み。先生、お休みしていいでしょうか？私。もう疲れたんで。で、明日休みだけども、まあ一応CME とか、ね、そうか、CFD やってんだっけ？だから、少しは、マーケットをフォローアップするんで、ね、また、ノートの方でアップデートしますから、見てください。七尾さんどうも。なんで泣いてるの？上行っちゃったから。これでもね、やっぱ取るの難しいよね。意外と思ったほど結構上行ったからね。大丈夫、七尾さん。なるほど。いいね。オッケーオッケー。まあさんどうもありがとう。ということで、ね、明日お休みなんでごゆっくり、ゆっくりしてください、皆さん。暑いので気をつけましょう。水分はこまめに取りましょう。ね。OK。じゃあ、沢木さんどうも。吉尾さんどうも。はい。じゃあマイクをミュートにして、幸田さんどうも。お別れになります。どうもです。See you. ニッコさんどうも。ありがとうございました。どうもです。今日はね、始めて途端に指標が出て、急にマーケット上がったから、わけわかんなかったね。清水さんどうも。 ありがとうございます。お疲れ様でした。今度見ようね、このカルフマンとケルトナーのこのインジケーション。ね。ここで行こう。前回もなんかいろいろジャンプとかやってたけど、ジャンプってなんか、ジャンプするときとしないときが激しいんで、今度はこのカルケルで行こう、カルケル。お疲れ様です。
Okay, so September, is it 75 or 50 bips then?
カルケル。カルケル。怖い話は、よく考えたらさ、自分で怖い話するのってさ、余計怖くねえか。嫌なんだけど。自分で一人でこうやってさ、皆さんいるのは分かってるけど、結局話してるのは私ですからね。私ですからね。今日はちょっと、まだね、声の調子があれなんで、もうちょっと、金曜の夜あれがいいよね。お盆の時期。わざとお盆の時期を狙って話すという。ね。お化けちゃんが一番多い時に話した方が雰囲気的にいいんじゃないかと思って。お疲れ様です。はい。吉祥だよ、吉祥だよ。
Financial conditions are so much looser. We're seeing a lot of big move into tech now. We're seeing a fallout in 2-year yields. Like the investors are undoing what the Fed already kind of did. And so is that going to kind of force the Fed's rhetoric a little more intensely?
いいしょ、このケルトナ、カルマ&ケルトナね。綺麗な具合で。ね。まあいいや。これで一応終わりにします。またね、ノンさん。はい。どうやってやったらいいのこれ。ギエ。これだ。